"Can I clean your barn for a plate of food?" But when the struggling rancher saw her, he froze. Texas Panhandle, winter of 1879. The wind howled across the open prairie like a wounded ghost. Snow drifted low and thin, swirling across red dirt and brittle grass, as if the land itself was trying to hide its bones. The sky hung gray and low, pressing silence into every creak of wood and rusted hinge. Bo Ramsay stood at the barn door, one hand gripping the frame. His coat hung heavy on his shoulders, lined with dust and old sweat. He had seen winters come and go, but this one bit harder, emptier. That's when he saw her. A woman kneeling just outside the front gate, dress torn at the hem, hair tangled in the wind. She cradled a bundled child to her chest, her knees sunk into the frozen earth, lips chapped and trembling. "Please," she said, her voice cracked like dry kindling. "I can clean your barn, anything, just a plate of food for her." Bo didn't answer at first. His eyes caught something else. A scrap of fabric near the child's neck. A scarf worn thin, frayed at the edges, but embroidered still with a familiar thread, agave, blossoms yellow with red trim. His chest tightened like a fist. "Where did you get that scarf?" he asked, low and steady. The woman clutched it. It belonged to my husband." "What was his name?" A pause. "Then Luis Ortega." The world tilted. Bo's hand found the barn wall as if to keep himself standing. The name hit like the crack of gunfire reverberating through the years. Luis Ortega. The boy with fire in his eyes and a laugh that could outshine a battlefield. The one who'd dragged Bo through the mud at Wilderness, wrapped this very scarf around his shattered shoulder, whispering, "You're not dying here, Migo. Not next to me." Luis, who never came home. Branded a traitor, hung before Bo could speak for him. And now here she was, his widow. And that child god, she had his eyes. Bo turned away, jaw clenched. "Come inside." The woman stayed kneeling. "Sir, I'm not asking for charity." "I can work," I said. "Come inside." Bo growled sharper now. Before she freezes. Still holding her child, the woman stood. Slowly, with the kind of caution a person learns when the world's turned them away too many times. He didn't look back, just opened the door and left it ajar. Inside the cabin smelled of pine smoke and silence. Bo lit the stove, poured warm water into a chipped basin, and set out the last of the cornbread without a word. She whispered, "Thank you." He didn't reply. He only watched her unwrap the scarf and remembered the day he lost a friend and the promise he never got to keep. This isn't just another story about the Wild West. It's about how the smallest thread, a scarf in the wind, can tie together a war, a promise, and two strangers at the edge of survival. So settle in. Wrap yourself in a blanket, pour a warm drink. And before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Bo Ramsay hadn't always been a man of few words. But somewhere between the war and the fire that took half his shoulder, silence had become a language of its own. The next morning came slow and bitter. Frost clung to the rafters like claws. Inside the cabin, the woman Meera and her child slept curled together beneath the same thin quilt. Bo was already up, boots crunching on snow outside, hauling water with his left hand and jaw locked tight. He didn't ask for her name, didn't ask why she had come. All he knew was the scarf and the way Luis's daughter had clung to her mother like a sapling in a storm. Meera woke to a chipped tin mug of hot water left near the fire. No note, no words. Just the quiet evidence of someone who didn't believe in grand gestures, only necessary ones. She watched him through the window, watched the way he chopped wood, Slow, deliberate swings with one hand balancing each log with the toe of his boot. When she offered to help, he handed her a pitchfork without a word and pointed toward the stalls, then walked away. Not out of rudeness, but because Bo Ramsay had learned long ago that words didn't keep people alive. Actions did. Over the next 3 days, Meera swept the barn, cleaned the hearth, mended blankets with whatever thread she could find. She didn't ask for more than she needed, and Bo didn't comment when she used the last of his lard to mix cornmeal for her daughter. He just nodded once and went on stacking kindling. She began to see how he moved, opening the door with an elbow, tying rope with his teeth, writing in a ledger with painstaking scrawl, always with his left. It wasn't clumsy, it was practiced, precise. Survival made elegant by repetition. But it wasn't until the 4th day, when the snow fell heavy and the flint wouldn't spark, that she saw something else. Bo crouched beside a small fire pit, struggling to light the tinder. His hand shook not from cold, but from frustration. The flint slipped. He gritted his teeth and tried again. Dropped it. Cursed low. Meera stepped forward, voice soft. "May I help?" Bo flinched. "I can do it." "I know," she said, "but it's harder with one hand." He froze. People noticed his missing arm, of course. But they didn't speak of it. Didn't look too long. Didn't ask. But she had. And not with pity. Just truth. "You see it?" he asked after a pause, voice low. She nodded. "I see it. And I don't think less of you for it." Something in him cracked, not enough to show, but enough to shift, enough to let her strike the flint once and catch flame. They sat beside it in silence as it took. The smoke curled like breath between them. Sometimes the deepest trust begins not with words, but with fire shared on a cold day. The fire crackled between them, casting soft orange light across the worn wood and worn-out hearts. Bo Ramsay hadn't planned to speak, but sometimes silence gives way when memory knocks too hard. He stared into the flame for a long moment, as if it were burning away the years. Then his voice came low like gravel under boot. "You knew Luis," he said. Meera blinked. "Yes," she whispered. "He was my husband." Bo gave a slow nod. "He talked about you." She looked up, startled. He did. Bo's eyes didn't move from the fire. Said he married a woman with the voice of a chapel bell. Said he'd walk barefoot through hell just to hear you laugh again. Meera's breath hitched. Her hand moved instinctively to the scarf at her neck. "This scarf," she said. "He always wore it." Bo finally looked at her. His gaze wasn't soft, but it wasn't hard either. It was full of something old and buried and unfinished. "He tore it that night," Bo murmured. "Wilderness. Grape shot hit me high in the shoulder. I thought I was done for. Couldn't feel my right arm. Luis pulled me from the mud, pressed this scarf against the wound, told me I wasn't dying next to him." His hand, the one still there, tightened into a fist. "They captured him after. Branded him a deserter. I never got to testify. Never got to clear his name." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred. Meera closed her eyes, the weight of grief and clarity settling over her like snowfall. "They told me he was helping smugglers," she whispered. "Said he died a criminal." Bo shook his head. "He fed families. Helped people cross to find kin. He never took a coin for it." She turned her face toward the fire. "He died trying to carry a baby across a river. The mother drowned. He tried to explain. They didn't care." Bo stood suddenly, walked to the cabinet, and pulled a small locked tin from behind a sack of flour. He opened it and removed a folded piece of yellowed paper, its edges soft with age. "He wrote to me," Bo said. "From jail." He handed her the letter. Her hands trembled. "Bo hermano, if she ever comes looking, take care of her like she's blood." Meera's tears fell silent and clean. She looked up at Bo. "He never told me he wrote to anyone." Bo's jaw clenched. "Didn't know if it'd reach me, I guess." But it did. The fire snapped, and outside the wind had settled into stillness, the kind that comes after truth is finally spoken aloud. Some debts can't be paid in coin or time, only in care and in keeping a promise made behind bars. That night, neither of them slept much. Meera sat near the hearth, the letter folded gently in her lap, as if it might tear from too much weight. Bo worked quietly in the corner, mending the busted hinge on a wooden chest, his one hand steady as ever. And between them, wrapped in 2 patched quilts and a borrowed piece, Lucia slept with her thumb curled under her chin. Bo didn't speak for a long time. But when he did, it wasn't to explain or apologize. It was simply this: "You're safe here." Meera didn't reply right away, but she nodded. And sometimes a nod carries more trust than 100 spoken words. The next morning, the frost on the windows turned to beads of dew as the sun stretched itself over the plains. It was a rare, soft day, the kind that made winter feel like it might forget itself for a little while. Lucia was the first to wake. She tiptoed across the floor in socks far too big for her, dragging a rag doll she'd stitched from old flour sack linen. She didn't ask for breakfast. She didn't cry for her mother. She just sat by the fire, humming something only she knew, tapping her feet in time. Bo looked up from sharpening his knife and stared. It had been a long time since a child's voice filled this place with anything but ghosts. Meera, watching from the corner, caught the way Bo's shoulders softened just a bit. Later that day, Lucia followed him outside as he chopped kindling. She didn't speak, just watched. When he bent to stack the wood, she ran up, grabbed a small log with both her arms, and carried it to the porch with a grunt. Bo raised a brow. "That." "So," he muttered. Lucia beamed. "Strong like you," she said. Bo didn't laugh, but something behind his eyes glimmered like thawing ice. Meera watched the two from the window. It was then she realized what was happening, not just to Bo, not just to the house, but to herself. There had been too many days in her life where silence meant danger. But here it meant breathing room. It meant time to stitch, to hum, to let her child be a child. And when Lucia's laughter rang out again that afternoon, chasing a stray chicken around the coop, it didn't feel like a miracle. It felt like something earned, something sown in dirt and tears, now blooming. But healing doesn't come without memory, and not all scars are visible. That night the wind outside whispered like a hymn, only the forgotten could hear. Inside, the fire crackled low, casting long amber shadows across the floor. Lucia had fallen asleep with her head in Meera's lap, her breath slow and warm against the cotton folds of Meera's dress. Bo sat on the far end of the room, whittling a soft piece of pine down to almost nothing. He hadn't spoken since supper. But the silence wasn't cold, not anymore. It was the kind that asked for permission and waited. Meera smoothed Lucia's curls back, then looked up. "She laughed today," she said quietly. Bo nodded once. "Sounded like spring." Another silence. Then Meera spoke again. Her father. She began used to whistle like that. Soft. Just enough to make her toes curl. Bo stopped his knife. His shoulders didn't move, but his eyes flickered toward her. "He was hanged in El Paso," she continued, "for a crime he didn't commit. They said he was running goods, said he was helping smugglers cross the river. She looked down at the scarf on her neck. Her fingers touched it the way one touches a wound. He was carrying a child, an orphan. The mother had drowned trying to reach the other side. He didn't make it past the riverbank. Beau's grip on the knife tightened. I remember the orders, but I never heard the truth. She nodded slowly. No one did. They just needed someone to blame. The silence after that wasn't empty. It pulsed. Then Beau exhaled, set the knife down, rubbed his one hand over his face like a man scrubbing off memory. I lost someone too, he said. Meera met his eyes. Her name was Ruth. She was a nurse. We met in the last year of the war. She patched up wounds others turned away from. Black, white, north, south didn't matter to her. His voice went quieter. She died after a riot in Amarillo. Tried to shield a child. Took 5 boots to the ribs. I held her while she bled out. Meera said nothing. Beau didn't expect her to. That was the night I stopped believing kindness meant safety, he whispered. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Meera stood not because she was leaving, but because she needed to be closer. She crossed the room, careful not to wake Lucia, and sat on the floor beside him. Their shoulders didn't touch, but their grief did. You kept your promise to her, Meera said. You gave warmth to a stranger. Beau looked at her, truly looked, and for once did not turn away. Sometimes healing begins not with answers, but with being heard. If this part moved you, press 1 in the comments. If it didn't, press 0. We want to know what you feel. The morning after their shared truths, the world seemed quieter. Not peaceful, no, but softened like a wound that finally stopped bleeding. Meera moved through the cabin with a rhythm that matched the hush of snowfall, while Beau sharpened a blade with steady, deliberate strokes. Lucia hummed softly to herself, building tiny towers from pine cones by the hearth. But peace out here rarely lingers. That night, just as the wind shifted and the coyotes fell silent, smoke slipped under the door like a whisper of warning. Beau sat up first. Then came the sound, the low roar of fire catching dry timber, and then Meera's gasp. In one swift motion, Beau threw off the quilt, reached for the water bucket, and kicked the door open. Flames licked the porch rail. Fire raced across the side of the house like it knew where to hurt first. Get the girl, Beau barked, already pulling the pump bucket with his left hand, his right sleeve flapping like a flag caught in battle. Meera didn't ask. She scooped Lucia into her arms and darted for the back door. Outside, the night was bright with firelight. Not the kind that warmed it devoured. Beau cursed his boots sinking in mud as he tried to throw water against a flame that had already claimed the wall. It's no use, Meera shouted. Beau, come on, but he kept throwing water, one-handed, frantic, like he could fight the past if he just moved fast enough. Then, in a single breath, he stopped. His eyes scanned the trees. Movement. A shadow slinking away on horseback. Beau's voice dropped to something cold and iron-hard. He sent someone. Elden Cray, Meera whispered. Beau nodded. This was a warning. They fled through the back wind, slicing through the holes in their coats. Beau led them to the half-collapsed livestock barn. Inside, he pushed hay aside, revealing a hidden trapdoor beneath. I used to hide whiskey here during the embargo, he said. No one else knows it exists. They climbed down into the cellar. It was musty cold, but safe. Lucia whimpered. Beau knelt beside her, brushing soot from her cheeks. You're safe now, little one. I promise. Above them, the fire raged, a crackling chorus of loss. Meera sat back against the dirt wall, cradling Lucia. "This is my fault," she said, her voice hollow. "He wants me silenced." Bo didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat beside her. Close, grounded. "You think running will stop him," he finally said. "He's not after you. He's after your story. And you carry the truth." "I can't let you burn for it," she whispered. "You won't," Bo said. "Not without me." Their eyes met in the darkness, and the moment held fragile but unbroken. The fire wasn't the end, it was a line drawn in the sand, and neither of them would back away. The fire had taken their roof, but not their will. By dawn, the blaze had died, leaving blackened beams and the scent of charred memory. Bo stood amid the ash jaw, clenched eyes fixed on the smoking remains. But beside him, Meera held her daughter close, and her voice, though quiet, did not waver. "We ride at first light," she said. "He burned down our home. I won't let him burn the truth." So they rode to Mason Hollow. The courthouse wasn't much, just 4 leaning walls of weathered pine and a warped flag overhead, but on that morning, it held the weight of something far bigger justice long denied. Bo helped Meera from the wagon, his hand steady beneath her elbow. She wore Luis's old scarf, threadbare but proud, and carried a folded letter close to her chest. The last words her husband had written, meant for Bo, meant for her. Inside the room was full, curious townsfolk, hardened ranchers, women with tight mouths and eyes full of suspicion. They all turned as Meera walked to the front. Elden Cray sat smug at the defense table, cane resting beside his boot, his crooked smile curling like smoke. His lawyer, a lean man with ink-stained fingers and a voice sharp as a branding iron, rose first. "There's no proof," he barked. "Only the word of a grieving woman and a war-torn man. No records, no testimony, just grief masquerading as evidence." The judge, a man older than the mountains, nodded, stone-faced. "Then let her speak." Bo squeezed Meera's hand once. She stood. "My name is Meera Ortega," she began, voice trembling, but not breaking. "And I am here not to grieve, but to testify." She spoke of Luis, of the scarf, of the child he carried when they arrested him. She told them how Elden Cray had signed the execution order before a trial had even begun, how he laughed as the rope pulled Luis from the earth. Cray's lawyer shouted objections. The judge waved him off like a buzzing gnat. When Meera's voice finally cracked, Bo rose, silently crossed the room, and placed her hand over his chest. "Let me hold the fear," he whispered. "You hold the truth." And with that she continued. Then she reached into her coat and held out the letter. Luis's final words. His plea for Bo to protect the woman he loved. The judge took the paper, read in silence. Then he looked at Cray. "This letter matches prior correspondences in handwriting. It is admissible." A hush fell. Then guilty. 3 times the word echoed through the room. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty of abuse of power. Guilty of murder. Cray didn't speak, didn't sneer. He only stared at the floor like a man who'd just heard the gallows being built, with his name on the wood. Justice had spoken, but would peace follow? The rope had done its job. Elden Cray swung in silence, the morning wind brushing against the gallows like it too was ready to let go. But for Meera and Bo, justice wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of something new. They didn't rebuild the old cabin. No, some things like the weight of memory and the smell of fire cling too deep to be covered by wood and nails. Instead, they traveled 5 miles west, past the hills Luis once dreamed of crossing, to a patch of land Bo had never touched since the war. There, where prairie grass bent like bowed heads, and the earth still smelled of rain, they built a new home. They called it the Last Light, not because it was the end, but because it was what remained after loss, after war, after a fire meant to destroy. The house rose slowly, board by board, built with one hand and two determined hearts. Lucia watched from the porch as Beau carved beams, lifted frames with the help of neighbors who once looked at him with nothing but pity. Now they came with hammers and nails and stayed for stew and silence. Meera painted the shutters a soft green. Luis always liked this color, she murmured one afternoon, wiping her brow. Beau said nothing, just handed her a clean cloth and nodded. In time, travelers started stopping by. Cowboys with wounds too deep for whiskey. Widows who didn't cry anymore, just stared past the horizon. And children, always the children, who found the garden, the warm bread, the kind woman who told stories that healed without preaching. The inn became known not just for its food or shelter, but for what it gave back, peace in a world that didn't offer much of it. And Lucia. She grew with the seasons. At 10, she embroidered her first scarf. Yellow thread, red blossoms, just like the one her father had once worn. Beau held it in his hand for a long moment, calloused fingers brushing each careful stitch. "She's got your steadiness," he said softly. "No," Meera whispered, her hand on his. "She's got his courage." Beau built her a writing desk by the window. Each morning she'd sit and scrawl crooked letters while Meera taught her words like hope, mercy, and truth. In the evenings, she'd curl on Beau's lap and read them back slow, careful, proud. Some nights they'd sit under the porch light, the three of them wrapped in old blankets and new warmth. The wind would carry the scent of sage and pine, and the stars would blink like old friends. It was a life made not from what they had lost, but from what they had chosen to rebuild. But even in a home built from healing, old shadows don't always stay gone. What happens when the past knocks again, not with a gun, but with a question? The sun spilled across the wooden porch of the Last Light, like honey on an old plate, slow, golden, and familiar. Lucia sat barefoot on the step, her knees pulled to her chest, a square of cloth stretched tight in her embroidery hoop. Her fingers moved carefully, hesitantly, drawing each stitch like it mattered more than words. Inside, Meera stirred beans over the stove. The scent of cumin and slow-simmered onions drifted through the house, earthy and warm. Beau out by the coop was replacing a broken fence rail with slow precision, his one hand steady as ever. It had been nearly a year since the fire. Nearly a year since the courthouse. And nearly a year since Meera had stood beneath a gallows and felt something buried rise up instead. But it wasn't vengeance that had bloomed in her chest. It was continuance. Lucia tugged the thread through and leaned back, frowning at her work. "Mama," she called softly. "How do you stitch a memory?" Meera stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well," she said, sitting beside her daughter, "first, you remember who gave it to you. Then you decide what parts are yours to carry, and what parts you pass on." Lucia looked down at the fabric in her lap. The thread was bright yellow. The blossoms she'd drawn out were uneven but proud. "Like Papa's scarf?" she asked. Meera nodded slowly, eyes glinting. "Just like it." Lucia's fingers brushed the petals. "Will I ever meet him?" Beau approached quietly from the yard, boots soft on the dirt path. He didn't interrupt, just leaned against the porch post and listened. Meera folded her hands in her lap. "Not the way you meet most folks, no. But you've already heard his voice." Lucia tilted her head. "When every time you stand up for someone smaller than you," Meera said, Every time you offer your seat to a stranger, or tell the truth when it costs you. That's him. That's your father living through your hands. Lucia was quiet for a moment. Then she set the hoop aside and leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. I want to be brave, she whispered. Like he was. Beau's voice rumbled gently from the porch rail. You already are. Lucia turned to him. Even if I'm scared, he nodded, especially then. That night, a small wagon arrived at the last light just after dusk. An older woman climbed down slowly, leaning on a cane. Her eyes were sharp, her shoulders tired. She held a letter in her hand. Meera met her at the porch. I'm looking for the wife of Luis Ortega, the woman said plainly. Meera nodded. You've found her. The woman hesitated, then offered the envelope. I knew your husband. He helped my son cross the river, fed him when no one else would. My son lives in Arizona now, has children of his own. He asked me to bring this. Inside the envelope was a drawing, crude but recognizable. A man with dark eyes and a crooked grin holding a child high in the air, a yellow scarf fluttering from his neck. Lucia took it with wide eyes. Is that Papa? She asked. Meera smiled through tears. That's how someone remembered him. She framed the drawing that night and hung it in the kitchen right above the stove, right where the warmth always stayed. Weeks later, Beau found Lucia writing something at her desk by the window. A letter folded carefully. To someone who lost their way, the envelope read. He didn't ask what it meant, just sat beside her and handed her a stamp. Lucia looked up. I think people forget how strong words can be, she said. Beau gave her a quiet smile. Your father never did. She paused. You miss him every day. Lucia folded the letter. Me too. Even though I never met him. Beau placed his hand on hers. That's the funny thing about love, it reaches forward, not just back. The next morning, Lucia stood outside in her new boots scarf tied tight around her neck, red blossoms dancing against the yellow fabric. She waved as a traveler passed by the inn. Safe roads, she called. Meera watched from the porch. Beau leaned beside her, arms crossed. She's becoming something strong, he said. Meera smiled. She's becoming someone who remembers. And in that quiet, with dust in the air and coffee on the stove, the house felt not just full, but true. Not because it had 4 walls, but because inside those walls lived the legacy of a man wrongly killed, a woman who never stopped walking, a soldier who chose to build instead of bury, and a girl with small hands and a heart big enough to carry them all forward. But before this story ends, there's still one question left. Can love born from ashes ever truly feel like home? The wind that rolled over the Texas panhandle that morning was warm. Not dry like summer's wrath, nor sharp like winter's warning, just gentle. The kind of breeze that made curtains flutter and memory stir. A wind of change. Meera Ortega stood at the edge of her garden, fingers dusted with earth. She was no longer the woman who had once knelt at a stranger's gate, starving and trembling. She was a mother now, a keeper of truth, a builder of firelight. Behind her, the last light bustled. Lucia's laughter echoed through the open windows. Beau's voice, rough but light, was teaching her how to splice rope without fraying the ends. There was the thud of boots on old planks, the creak of the porch swing, the gentle rhythm of a place that had finally learned how to rest. Meera wiped her hands on her apron and stepped inside. On the kitchen wall, Luis's drawing still hung above the stove. Over time, the frame had gathered flecks of oil and dust. Meera never cleaned it too hard. It belonged there, lived in like everything else in the house. She stirred the pot of beans, not because she had to, but because it was what she did now. Feed. Warm. Continue. Outside, Bo sat on the porch rail, carving wood slowly with his left hand. The piece was small, a horse maybe, or a hawk, something strong. Lucia sat cross-legged beside him, reading from a book that had once belonged to Meera's father. Bo looked up as Meera stepped out. "Afternoon," he said. She smiled. "The beans are simmering. You hungry?" He raised the carving, hungry and almost done. She sat beside him. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away, just held it out. It was a flame, not a candle, not a torch, just the shape of fire carved into smooth cedar small enough to fit in her palm. She stared at it. "I've seen you carry it," Bo said softly, "since the day you walked up my road." Meera looked down at the wooden flame, eyes misting. "I was cold," then she whispered. "You were burning," he corrected. They sat in silence side by side, watching the fields sway. Lucia burst from the cabin, shawl trailing behind her scarf, tied in a proud knot. "Mama," she called. "Someone's coming." Bo squinted down the dirt road. A man on a wagon. Not a threat, just a traveler. A stranger looking for food or rest, or something he hadn't yet named. Lucia ran to the gate, full of the boldness only children and survivors knew. The man tipped his hat. "This place got a name," Lucia nodded. "It's called the Last Light. My mama says it's the place where lost things come home." The man smiled. "Reckon I've been lost a while." Lucia pointed to the porch. "That's my mama and my pa. They can help." The man walked slowly toward the house. Bo stood. Meera remained seated, the carved flame still in her hand. "Do you want to let him in?" Bo asked. She looked up at him. "I am the one who lets people in now." And she was. She who had once begged for a crust of bread now offered warm stew and a place by the fire. She who had once carried shame in her voice now carried her name like a banner. She who had once lost everything now sat at the center of something whole. She stepped off the porch as the traveler reached the steps. "You hungry?" she asked, voice kind but firm. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Then come in," she said, "and stay until the world feels less heavy." He followed her inside. And as dusk spilled across the plains like a quiet hymn, the lights inside the last light flickered to life. One. Then another. Then another. Lucia helped set the table. Bo poured water from a tin pitcher. The traveler sat down, shoulders still tense, but eyes already softer. And Meera. She stood by the hearth. Her fire. Her house. Her family. Have you ever been the one kneeling at someone else's door, or the one who finally held the fire? We'd love to hear your story, or even just where you're watching from. Share it in the comments below. Because here at Wild West Love Stories, we don't just tell tales of loss and love. We remind each other what it means to belong again. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. The next story might feel like it was written just for you.